How does the history of land development, water rights, and water use affect drinking water access today? California's Central Valley is one of the most agriculturally productive regions in the country. It has over 6 million acres of farmland and grows 40% of the country's fruits and vegetables each year. The agricultural sector employs 420,000 people and uses over 20 million acre-feet of water each year in California. While these farms use and benefit from clean and abundant water in the Central Valley, coming from the Sierra Nevadas, many people who live in the Central Valley can't reliably access safe, clean drinking water in their homes. Those people are disproportionately low income and/or people of color. How is that possible? To understand that story, we need to understand the history of land and water rights in California. Back in the 1800s, indigenous people like the Yokut and others stewarded the land now known as California's Central Valley. It was a wetland with fertile soil. Then, based on the Homestead Act and the Desert Lands Act, the federal government gave away nearly 20% of federal land to 2 million households cheaply and quickly between 1863 and 1939. Those households were disproportionately white due to state and federal laws. For example, the Homestead Act excluded Chinese immigrants, indigenous people, freed slaves, and their descendants from acquiring land. Around the same time, many Mexican citizens had their land taken away by the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. In these ways and others, white settlers gained access to land in the Central Valley, while immigrants and people of color were excluded from it. But how is this history relevant to today's drinking water challenges? It matters because California's water rights are tied to land ownership. A water right allows someone to use water. California has two common types of water rights for surface water called riparian and appropriative rights, and a third common type of groundwater right for underground water called overlying rights. Riparian rights allow people who own land by a stream or river to use water on the adjacent land. In this image, someone who owns parcel C could use river water on their land with a riparian right. Appropriative rights allow people to divert water from a stream or river if they can put it to beneficial use. So while anyone could technically do this, it was very difficult unless you also owned land on which to use the water for farming. In this image, someone who owns parcel A could divert river water and use it on their land with an appropriative right. Overlying rights for groundwater allow people who own land to pump water directly beneath that land. So all three types of water, directly or indirectly, required land ownership, which people of color were systematically excluded from via the various laws discussed earlier. You might be wondering, why can't we share or change the water rights? Water rights last forever, by design, so that people can make investments to put the water to beneficial use year after year. This means that anyone who wants a new water right must either buy land or water rights, which is expensive, or apply for a new appropriative water right. But water in most of the rivers in California's Central Valley have already been fully claimed by water rights. So as the processes set in motion by federal and state laws for granting land and water played out, mostly white farmers became owners of large swaths of land, and with their land they cemented perpetual access to water to farm it. Meanwhile, many immigrants and people of color moved to California's Central Valley as farm workers. They often lived in informal settlements without water utilities and no access to the senior water rights held by others. Oftentimes, they had no choice but to live in these locations because more formal settlements were sundown towns, which means they excluded non-white people through laws, intimidation, or violence. As time passed, many farmers sold their land and water rights to large agribusinesses. They gained access to water through California's conveyance system, with contracts to receive water deliveries from state and federal agencies. They also invested in large wells to pull water out from deeper and deeper in the ground. Meanwhile, people of color live in smaller communities with limited resources to access water, many of them at least. Many of these communities depend on groundwater for their drinking water supplies. However, agricultural activities lead to groundwater depletion and contamination from farming runoff. Because of this, many farm workers live in areas with unreliable or polluted water. Even though water rights may not be the direct cause, they intersect with a broader system perpetuating the state of affairs. This is the city of Tuliville, which has high rates of nitrates in its water and cannot access the canal water that runs right next to it due to water rights. As water supplies become more uncertain in the future, they're likely to disproportionately affect marginalized communities, highlighting the importance of prioritizing social equity in water management. So what is happening to address these challenges? In 2012, California passed a Human Right to Water Act, which recognizes every human being has the right to safe, clean, and affordable and accessible water for human consumption, cooking, and sanitary purposes. The law doesn't have funding to implement this mandate, but state officials consider the human right to water in their decision making. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, enacted in 2014, aims to safeguard California's groundwater by creating local groundwater sustainability agencies. These GSAs, as they're called, must develop plans to address overpumping of groundwater by 2040. California's Department of Water Resources helps oversee the creation and implementation of these plans to ensure they will be successful. While a helpful law moving things in the right direction, some challenges with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act include that its implementation timeline is long and that powerful agricultural interests are resistant to reducing their groundwater use. In 2019, California passed its SAFER law, which provides funding to help achieve the human right to water. This has been helpful, but it's still not enough money to achieve all of the goals necessary. Finally, the Co-Equal project, the one we're part of, is aiming to create knowledge with people who have historically been excluded from water management in California to make information about the water management in this state more accessible. There's even a specific use case focused on drinking water, through which environmental justice advocates and water systems have advocated for understanding the impacts of prioritizing drinking water and surface water deliveries. These efforts demonstrate a collective commitment to addressing water issues and moving toward a more equitable and sustainable future. To learn more, you can consider reading some of the pieces listed here. And thank you to our UC Water Academy instructors, Kristen Dobbin and Jenny Rumpel, the Co-Equal Project, and VecDZ.com for helping make this video possible.